So chapter 7, just to recap, really the very beginning that we touched upon last week. So chapter 7 is really all about the Klipat Noga, which is, if you will, the neutral realm of this world, or the realm that can be and should be elevated, the realm that may seem still somehow, maybe a little bit peeled. That's why the word Klipat Noga, peeled. In other words, covered with all sorts of hindrances. But if we can just peel that peel, then we'll uncover God's fruit or God's light and redeem the fruit that was within. That was the analogy that we used, the metaphor that we used. But that's what chapter 7 is about. So just to put it into practice or into real terms, maybe we're speaking about food that is in the neutral realm. If we use food just for our own self-pleasures, then we're really not redeeming it. But if we are using food to use the energy that the food gives us, then to do good, to do mitzvahs, then we are redeeming that food too. Or if we're saying a blessing over the food, we're also redeeming it. We're also using the Klipat Noga for the side of holiness. So that's really the big idea. Now there is a side, he also said, that is completely irredeemable, which is called Sitra Achra, right? And that we spoke about towards the end of chapter 6, which is the evil side. And we know what the evil side is because the Torah speaks about it. And it tells us that there are 365 things, 365 negative commandments that relate to things that cannot be redeemed. But that was the big idea thus far. Let's continue, as you mentioned, Margot, at the bottom of page 175, with the words are not performed for the sake of heaven, right here. Does anyone want to read? Anyone? Okay.
I'll read if nobody else wants to.
Thank you, Margot.
I'll start it out. Okay. Are not performed for the sake of heaven, but only by the will, desire, and lust of the body. As we already elaborated, there is no middle ground between the holy and the profane, no gray area that is neither one nor the other. A thing is either holy and devoted to God, or it is profane. So all of the acts listed, though kosher and permissible, are klipa, because they are not directly and solely committed to the fulfillment of God's will, but to the fulfillment of the will and desire of the body.
Right. So just to dwell on this for just a second, because I think it's an important matter. And that is that it's almost like being pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. There's no middle ground. Same year. If we're dealing with the neutral realm of this world of the Klipat Noga, you either use it for the good or you don't, or use it for the bad. If it's for selfish desires again, then you used it for the bad. If it's for godly desires, it's in order to use that neutral realm for the good or for God himself, for God's work in this world, then it's holy. There's no middle ground. It's important to note this because I think it begs the question, what do we do? What are we doing? As we mentioned last week, with maybe 70% of the day that is in the neutral realm. We have the potential really to transform the majority of the day into holiness. There's a majority of the day, I believe, is in the neutral realm. So we really have the potential of making most of the day completely holy. And so instead of seeing it, as a black and white statement, but let's see it as an encouraging statement. That really, each time we eat and we use it for something, we use that food to do a mitzvah, then we're turning that part of the day into holy grounds. And that should be very encouraging. But yes, Ronnie.
A little while ago, you said about being selfish is a negative thing. And I think that needs to be some better definition on that. On being selfish, one selfish if they're taking care of themselves so they can survive. That there's so much that they need to take care of. Being selfish is not a bad thing. It's when it gets too much, when you're focused too much on you, taking care of you. But if you don't take care of you, nobody else will benefit either.
Right.
Thoughts?
No, absolutely. So let's define the word selfishness. Selfishness, you're right, can be healthy. If selfishness ends with the I, then it's bad. if selfishness is a means to something towards something that is greater than the I, then it is good. So when you take care of yourself, to go to your example, when you take care of yourself so that you can be healthy, and then afterwards use your healthy self to do mitzvahs, for example, right? Or to better the world around you, then it's not selfishness to begin with, because you don't take care of yourself just for yourself. You took care of yourself as a means to better the world.
Others. Yeah, good. Thank
But
you.
if it ends just with the I, then it's selfishness. That's bad.
Ronnie, it is said that these days, we have too many eye specialists.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. I, with the, not EYE, right? Just the letter I. Very good. Excellent. That's right. That's right. But I do believe there are times in life where we have to be completely engrossed with the I, but we can't get lost in the I and just stay there. For example, one example is like you stated, right? To take care of our health. And absolutely, then we have to do everything to take care of ourselves. But also, I often say that to young people, that when you are looking for a mate to marry, then you should be as selfish as possible. But once you find that mate, then you have to be as selfless as possible. Right? It's true, I think, when you're looking for a place to study, whether it's a yeshiva or college or school, you have to be as selfish as possible, something that really fits your needs the most. But then again, you have to be as selfless as possible. And you have to remember that selfishness is only to then better yourself so that you can be a better citizen of the world, or you can really benefit the world more afterwards. Same with marriage. I'm not doing this just to satisfy my I. I'm not going to get married just so that someone can pamper me, but I'm getting married in order then to really create a union that transcends myself. And through that union also better the world around me. So selfishness ends with the I, then it's a problem.
Is
If
there
it
a
begins
word?
with the I, but ends with the you, then it's healthy.
Is there one single word for differentiating one selfishness from the other?
One single word?
A term?
Not sure. I don't know.
Okay.
Um,
Well, let's make one.
let's go. You should patent it if you find one. Okay. But the idea is that it can't end with the I. All right. Too many eye specialists these days. Okay. Fine. Let's continue at the bottom of page 175, unless, of course, there are any other comments, questions, disagreements. Okay. All right. So let's continue at the bottom of page 175. And even when it is a need of the body.
Should I continue?
Yes, please, Mongo.
Okay.
Yes.
And even where it is a need of the body or its very preservation in life, but his intention is not for the sake of heaven, that is, to serve God thereby. Klipa Noga includes not only luxuries or superfluous pleasures, but even the piece of bread that keeps one alive. If a person eats it as other animals do, it does not belong to the side of holiness, and thus by definition is of the other side. A person can be a glutton without transgressing any law of Torah, and even while leading a most simple and modest existence. He need not feast like a king. He can eat a dry crust of bread, followed by a sip of water, and this too belongs to the klipa, because any action that is not expressly directed toward holiness belongs to the other side. A person can wear clothes of silk and gold, and in so doing be serving God. He can wear sackcloth, yet this can be klipa. The story is told of a certain learned Jew, very pious in his way, who would fast and inflict all sorts of torments upon himself, wearing sackcloth underneath his clothes. One day, he went to visit a great tzaddik. He wanted the tzaddik to know how pious he was, so he opened his upper garments slightly so that the sacking would be visible. The tzaddik looked at him for a while and then said, "How clever he is, how clever he is." He repeated this several times until the man had to ask, "Who is so clever?" The tzaddik answered, "The Yetzar Hara, evil inclination, who took a man such as yourself and put him in a sack."
Right. just conclude that a person can live in utter conformity
with Torah law, even modesty and aesthetically, but entirely for himself.
Right. So I think it's a very powerful point, and it's a very truthful point, and it shouts the truth. Because after all, this man in the story was doing it for himself, for his self-image. Look at me. Look how great I am. Look what a tzaddik I am. So you may have been serving God in the process, but you did it for yourself. So that's Klipat Noga turned into Sitra Achra, into the negative side of this world. Reminds me of this, Oscar Wilde would say that the greatest feeling in the world is when you give money anonymously and then you have someone discover it. That was the greatest feeling. Maybe because someone who has a great feeling by giving anonymously and having someone discover it, maybe he's doing it for someone to eventually discover it. So he's doing it for himself. So fine, it's a mitzvah at the end of the day, but that mitzvah is so self-serving that it's Klipat Noga that was not redeemed. There's a terrible story told, but just to emphasize this point, told about this man who was entirely, observant, as you may call it. And one day, this poor man came knocking at his door, and he asked for food. Now the man didn't want to give him food. He didn't want, but he said, okay, it's a mitzvah to give tzedakah. So he went to his fridge and he found the leftover fish from 7 weeks ago and he gave it to him. The man ate the fish. He was starving, but he fell ill. So now this man who gave him the fish said, oh, I have another mitzvah to do. Not only do I have to, did I feed the poor, which is one mitzvah, but now I have the mitzvah of visiting the sick.
Yeah.
So he goes to the poor man's house and he visits the sick. The poor person had such bad reaction from the fish that he died. So he tells his wife, I have another mitzvah to do. I have to go to the funeral and escort the dead. He goes to the funeral. Now, of course, his family is sitting Shiva. He says, I have another mitzvah to do. I have to go comfort the mourners. After comforting the mourners, he comes home with a huge smile on his face. And his wife tells him, wow, why are you smiling so radiantly? And he responds to his wife, well, look, not every day that you get to fulfill 4 mitzvahs. I fed the poor, I visited the sick, I escorted the dead, and I comforted the mourners. Not realizing, of course, how blind he was to his own, his own self-serving feelings, in which he may have done technically some mitzvahs. I wouldn't even call them mitzvahs, but maybe technically or robotically, without really with missing completely the entire purpose of mitzvahs, of transforming the Klipat Noga into the side of holiness, of doing things for God himself. So that's what Rabbi Strauss is here interpreting through this story too, through the story of this guy who wore sacks and fasted and so on. But it's something to keep in mind. Are we doing things for ourselves? Or are we doing things for God? It's a question that we ought to ask ourselves really quite often. I'm about to do a mitzvah, fine. I can do it and I should do it. But at the end of the day, am I redeeming the Klipat Noga when doing it because I'm doing it for God? Or am I just doing it entirely for myself? Mitzvah might technically still be counted as a mitzvah. Remember, a deed is a deed no matter the intention. But are you redeeming the Klipat Noga? Now, speaking mystically, from a mystical standpoint, or from a really spiritual standpoint, from a cosmic standpoint, are we redeeming this Klipat Noga? Are we transforming what may seem as neutral into something holy? Or are we not? Are we making it worse? It's a question to ponder on. Rabbi Steinsault was a seeker of truth, and we would often quote the Kotzker Rebbe was another seeker of truth. And I remember him once saying to someone, which could be it could come across as a very offensive statement, but I don't know if maybe I've told the story before, and if I have, then you'll excuse me. But I remember that at the Tzemach Tzedek synagogue, where he was the official rabbi in the old city, people would come and bother him all the time. He was there, and he would chat with people and converse with people, and it was really quite a sight to see him every Shabbat and observe him and how he would interact with people. and very often respond to people in a very witty way. But one day there was a visitor from America who came and he asked the Rabbi of the synagogue if he could pray Musaf. He told him, look, I have a beautiful voice, you won't regret it. So he goes and he prays Musaf. And he had a beautiful voice. He had an opera sounding voice. And at the end of the prayer, he made the mistake of going to Rabbi Steinsault and boasting and saying to Rabbi Steinsault, no, what do you think of my prayer? Wasn't it beautiful? He was there with his friend. Again, as mentioned, Rabbi Steinsault was a true seeker of truth, and he couldn't stand these people who were like this guy in the story, right? So you did a mitzvah, you did Musaf, you did it for yourself to show off your voice.
Mhm.
The Rabbi Steinsault responded very, very, straightforwardly. He said to him, I got to tell you, your prayer stunk like a skunk.
Yeah.
Now his friend, who was right next to him, says, Rabbi, maybe he meant it. Maybe he sang from the heart. And Rabbi Steinsault, without hesitation, responds to him, it's very funny because in the entire animal kingdom, the only other animal that can tolerate the smell of a skunk is another skunk. So he shared this message very powerfully, very poignantly, with that little metaphor on that day. Because again, we can be praying, but it could be very self-serving. Are you showing off yourself? Is that why you asked to pray? Come on, wait for the Rabbi to come to you and say, or you go and you make all these noises. Okay, that's fine, it's nice, but who are you doing it for?
Yeah.
Are you redeeming Klipat Noga, or are you only doing it for yourself? That's the question. It's a truth that we can only answer. Okay, any questions, comments? I feel like I'm the only one speaking today, me and Ronnie.
I'd like to go back to the klipot again. The three impure ones are referred to the whirlwind, the great cloud, and the blazing fire.
Right, at the end of chapter 6, right.
And when I hear those words, the first things that come to my mind is the appearance of God, who appeared in a whirlwind, who appeared in a cloud, in the desert leading the people, and at night in a blazing fire. And those are the images that I have, and I don't see how it connects with the negative klipot.
Right. So that's a great question. So we can really go deep into this. So it's true, God appeared into this in using those three ideas, the whirlwind, the fire, and so on. But God was so there's this idea that's expressed by King Solomon's words of Zele umat ze asa Elokim, that there are two sides, as we say in English, two sides to everything. But there are two sides indeed to everything in this world. There is the holy side and the impure side. God, of course, is the holy side. So there's the holy side of the whirlwind. There's the holy side of the fire. But there's also the negative side of the whirlwind and the fire and the storm. Now, we see, if you really want to go into this, we see that God appears, as you mentioned, with those three things. But we also see those three things appear in a negative context in the Tanakh. So, for example, the whirlwind was when Jonah was fleeing from his God-given mission to go and save the city of Nineveh. It's a story we read on Yom Kippur, right? And there was this terrible whirlwind that caused a storm in the sea. And eventually they understood that it was Jonah who was on the ship, who was fleeing from his mission, that was causing all of this, and they threw him into the sea, as we know, and the whale swallowed him. He did teshuvah, and he went on to save the city of Nineveh and to fulfill his mission. But you see, that's the negative side of it, fleeing and that storm and that whirlwind. You also find that a big noise by Elijah, who was also fleeing. Elijah went to the desert to flee from God, to say to God, I can't lead this nation anymore. He said to him, it's better the day of my death than my life. And then God appears to him in a very still voice. Lo berash Hashem. He heard noise, but it says, no, it's not in this noise, not in the fire. So we find that there is this tremendous chaos also on the other side of things, right? Is God representing these three things that you mentioned, or that the Tanya mentions, and then there's the negative side representing it. So God comes with the holy side, and when we, the negative side can express itself also in whirlwinds and storms and fires. This against this. It's interesting because this big concept, by the way, he speaks of much later on, I think in chapter 11 or chapter 12, this concept that there is, for every holy thing in this world, there's its opposite, and vice versa, of course. So this concept is a concept that also should encourage us. Why? Because when we are doing something holy, then we'll very often, if not always, have opposition to that something that's holy. And we might get discouraged by this opposition. But we have to know it is specifically because we are doing something holy that we're being met with this opposition. If it wasn't holy, who doesn't have opposition? People that are dead, they don't have opposition. There's no life there. So if there's no life, if there's no potential for holiness, then there's also no opposition to it. But the second you have something that's good, you'll have a negative side meeting it. That's almost always the case. But it shouldn't be discouraging, quite the opposite. It should be encouraging that there's something holy being done, and therefore we're facing opposition. But in any case, it comes to mind when we're comparing the storm of God with the storm of fleeing from God, the whirlwind of God with the whirlwind of fleeing from God, the fire of God with the fire of fleeing from God too. Yes, Ronnie. No, you're on mute. There you go.
In listening to you talk about, there's always an opposite of holiness. If you're doing something holy, and what came to my mind as I'm hearing you say that, so what would be some of the things that were the opposite for the Rabbi Steinsault? What was some of the opposite things that would have happened for him or did happen?
I mean, I can point to many things that come to mind immediately, like, for example, his commentary of the Talmud, which was really revolutionary because it was the first commentary ever to make the Talmud accessible to the common man, by translating the Aramaic of the Talmud, adding his own commentary, and at the same time also punctuating the Talmud. It was never punctuated for people to actually be able to read it, and adding his own encyclopedia to it, all sorts of botanic, zoological, geographical maps and pictures. And he faced tremendous opposition. I know that in Bnei Brak, some people burnt his Talmud. Mm-hmm. And he himself really never related to it. Now, not only that, the people who burnt his Talmud eventually ended up doing the same thing. And they ended up having their own edition of a commentary of the Talmud. And once I asked Rabbi Steinsault, I actually told him, look, if you were the typical American, you would sue them. And he responded, why should I sue them? I'm happy that they're doing it. That was my goal, to make the knowledge of the Talmud accessible. So if they want to jump on the bandwagon, let it be. It's astonishing. But he faced tremendous opposition just for that and for many other things too. But there was a rabbi in Bnei Brak, I'll mention names, but he put a cherem on him, which means he excommunicated him. He faced a ton of opposition from that rabbi, and more than I could ever fathom, more than most people face. But he never relented. He really he always really remained true to his calling and was as driven and as resilient as could be.
Yeah.
Of course, he had the Lubavitcher Rebbe on his side too, and other great people who really, about Moshe Feinstein, who was a great halachic authority, who really supported him and showered him with love, but still. So he
wasn't the first one to have his books burned.
That's right.
Maimonides, his books were burned also by rabbis.
That's right.
Before the Inquisition burned the books, and before the Germans burned the books, the rabbis burned Maimonides' books as well.
That's right. Well said. Very good. That's right.
Encourage them to do more, I think.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. In a way, exactly. I think so. I think that the people who are really, look, if he was doing it for himself, I'm sure it would get to him. But he knew that, he knew that he was doing it for God. He wasn't doing it for himself. Eved Avraham Anochi. We just read it yesterday. It's a powerful statement. But I was thinking about it. This is how Rabbi Steinsault viewed himself, and that's how I think he had the strength also to overcome the opposition. This is how we should have the strength to overcome opposition. Because Eliezer, in yesterday's portion, Eliezer is sent by his master Abraham to go and find a wife for Yitzchak, Abraham's son. And he eventually meets Rivka, and Rivka, exhibits or demonstrates a tremendous kind heart by offering water for the camels that Eliezer had, and for Eliezer himself too. So Eliezer knows that this is the wife to be for Yitzchak, and he says to her, I'm here all by myself. Do you have a place for me to sleep? She says, yes, come over to my house, and I introduce you to my family. Now, when he introduces himself to Rebecca's family, he doesn't say, hello, my name is Eliezer. He doesn't say, hey, this is my business card, as some people would do. This is my profession. You know how he introduces himself? His only line. That's his only, he doesn't give his resume, CV. You know what he says? Eved Avraham Anochi. I am the servant of Abraham. That's my entire essence. I'm the servant of Abraham. It's not about me. Life is not about me. It's about who I serve. And I serve Abraham. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, by the way, would often quote this verse by reminding people, who are you serving? What's your essence? Are you serving your business card, your job? Are you serving your name? Eliezer taught us, no, it's not about my name. It's not about my business card. It's not about any of that. It's about who I'm serving. So who are you serving? He served Abraham. We should all be servers of God and servants of God. And in a way, I think that's how Rabbi Steinsault viewed himself. And that gave him, he wasn't in it for him. Was in it for him, opposition would be much tougher. But he knew that he had a greater calling. And as long as he was alive, he had to fulfill it with or without the position. Yeah.
Rabbi, what was the greatest objection to Rabbi Steinsalt's work on the Talmud? I mean, was it his interpretation of things, or just the format of what he did with the original Talmud itself?
On the surface or psychologically? On the surface, it was, yes, they attacked him for changing the way the Talmud was published. Talmud for hundreds of years was published in the Vilna edition, which was very strict, and the words had to be in a certain box, and the commentaries had to be in certain boxes on the side. And he changed that whole format for design purposes and for accessibility purposes. So they attacked him on what's called Surat Adaf, on that design. They also attacked him, of course, on his commentary, that it's too modern. Of course, he was trying to make it relevant and accessible without changing anything and without diluting anything, but it's too modern. Why is it psychologically? I'll tell you why. They were afraid to lose the monopoly. That's all. Lose the monopoly on people's Torah study. When the Torah itself says that Torah is the inheritance of the entire congregation of Jacob, Torah tzivalanu Moshe, Morasha Kilat Yaakov, it's my inheritance just as much as it is yours, just as much as it is to the most unaffiliated Jew. But they thought that they had the monopoly over Torah. And how dare Rabbi Steinsault comes and makes it accessible? No, it's got to go through us. That's what I believe. But I'm not gonna elaborate on that too much. All right. Anyhow, but Eved Avraham Anochi, he was the servant of God, and that's all he cared about. And that's how we should be too. Speaking of being servants of God, I think that helped us with that approach. That helps us again turn the Klipat Noga into into the holy side, because at the end of the day, if I'm serving God, then I have to transform everything for God. If I'm serving myself, then I can't redeem the klipat noga. That's the idea.